Good morning. This is Ryan Gilkerson, lead creative at Company 119, and this is the Coffee Cup. Last week we took a look at some web designs in Cleveland that we really liked, and we had the opportunity to talk to some great guests about what it's like to build web designs in Cleveland that work for the Cleveland market. Today we want to expand on that a little bit. This week on the Coffee Cup, we're going to talk a little bit about visual branding, about digital marketing strategy or digital branding strategy, mainly from a visual perspective. So I think it's really important when you're talking about branding to keep in mind how visuals impact the experience of the customer. As you're going to find out today, they play a big role in how people are going to view your brand. So when you're talking about it, we've got some stats here that I think are really important that I want to take a look at. 38% of all online customers will abandon a site that they feel is unattractive. Another 39% will abandon a site that takes too long to load. So the moral here is look good and be quick about it. When you're talking about images online, especially photos and logos and things of that nature, if they aren't sized correctly, two things can happen. They can be blurry, they can be ugly images then, and then they can also hurt your load time, especially on your mobile applications. And when you're talking about mobile load time, that's one of the most important things, not only for ranking on Google, but also for making sure that customers are hanging around your site long enough to make a purchase or interact with your site the way that you want them to. So visual elements are very, very important when it comes to branding. So then customers are 80% more likely to be able to recognize your brand if you have a signature color associated with it. Color is so important when it comes to branding. Think about people like the iconic Coca-Cola. You know that Coca-Cola is red. You know that Pepsi is red, white, and blue. You know that Company 119, for the most part, is going to be red, associated with that. So if you can associate your brand with a color, people see that color pop and they know that it's you right away. Of course, if they can associate that with an iconic logo, that with a font choice that's consistent, then people are going to know that that's you with your brand. Color is very important. Make sure you're thinking about it when you're picking out the color that's going to represent your brand. And then also, consistent branding alone can help increase revenues by up to 23%. That is more than just visuals, of course, but they do play a huge role. So when we're talking about branding, you're talking about a lot of different elements. The visual element is one, the theme is one, the company's values are all part of the branding. But if you can establish consistent branding from your online presence, whether it's your website, to your social media, to your email templates, right down to how you look at your place of business, if you could carry that theme through. I was just at T-Mobile yesterday, or just passed by T-Mobile. Their branding was impeccable. Everything matched on their walls. Their guys were decked out in these cool T-Mobile uniforms they have now with bubble vests and hats and all sorts of stuff. But it all was visually appealing, and that logo pops out. And I recognize that logo on TV. I recognize it on the website. Now I recognize it in the store. The branding message is consistent. I'm going to remember that brand. I'm 80% more likely to remember the brand because it's consistent. So let's look at some tips for creating that digital branding strategy, making it very visual. You want to study your competition. You want to know what brands look like in your industry. You want to incorporate your own elements and then think about your brand's story. So listen, you don't have to look like everybody else. If you look in the marketing industry, if you look at Cleveland marketing companies, Company 119 doesn't look like every other company. The same could be said for other brands. Like Flourish doesn't look like other companies, and Think Media doesn't necessarily look like other companies. But you can tell through visual elements that are on the page what we do and what industry we are in. So that's what you have to look at. You have to look at what other brands are doing. Now, other brands in our industry are very creative. They think outside the box. They try to kind of be maybe a little more abstract. I'd say like Company 119 sounds like a fire theme, but when you see how we work it into our strategy, it makes sense in the digital world. Other industries are much more straightforward. If we work with a lot of manufacturing companies, for example, they aren't getting into some of the more abstract thought. It's very, very streamlined and very in your face with their branding messages. So it's a little bit different. Study what works in your industry and incorporate that into what you do with your strategy. And then tip number 2, this is kind of your second step. This is when you start to put the ideas together. Create your 2 to 3 color palette. That includes black and white. Those are colors as well. Get a primary logo, select your fonts, and get some photography done. This is kind of that next step to getting the elements and designs together for what you're going to wrap all of your social media, your websites together around. The professional photography is so important. I know everybody thinks that they're a professional photographer because they have portrait mode on their phone now. That's great for headshots, things like that, if you just want to get some nice pictures there. But when you're talking about branding across a site, especially if you want to show people doing what you do. For example, if you own a landscaping company and you want to have beautiful pictures of people working on the properties, if you want to have before and after shots of the properties, these are things that you really want to have professional photographers do, because this is going to represent your brand. I think when you look at major brands, for example, like Coca-Cola and Pepsi that we talked about earlier, they don't just go out with an iPhone and just take pictures around, and if they ever do that, please believe that it will be done in such a unique way and such a creative way that will be part of the branding. It will be that they were taken on an iPhone. But for your website, for your social media, for all of these elements, you really want to make it as professional as possible, especially for Instagram on social media. Make it look really good. And then finally, you want to remember the 5 Ps. So the 5 Ps are positioning. How are you useful for your customer? Positioning means this, like you want to take a look at different elements. For example, you want to take a look at high price versus economical, luxury brand versus everyday brand. You kind of want to build this matrix of characteristics and decide what position your company is going to be in within that matrix. Promise. What do you promise to do for your customer? This is where you get into Nike saying, just do it, or McDonald's saying, I'm loving it. When you have that little line and you're going to deliver something, what are you going to deliver to your customers? And then when you're talking about your personas, we've talked about personas so many times. Who is your customer? What do they want? What do they look like? Also personas within your brand. Who is your brand persona? What are you trying to reflect there? Personality, who are you? Are you funny? Are you somebody who's very serious? Are you an expert authority? Are you somebody who is sympathetic? Like, what is your personality with your messaging? And finally, product. What will you offer over time? What's the experience like of getting this product from beginning to end? How does that story arc go in terms of where people start out with you and where do they end up with you? And how are you capturing that across your brand visually? Are you showing people at the beginning process, like your early manufacturing process, right to shipping to the store, right to people trying it out, to people using it at home, to taking a next step with your product? Are you capturing all elements of the experience of your product through visuals? If you can visually capture these elements, you're going to be ahead of your competition and you're going to have a great online brand. We're going to talk more about digital branding strategy this week, but we hope that for today you learn more about visually branding your product or your service before you finish your first cup of coffee than your competition will all day. Thanks for joining us.